Hello and welcome to New World Comics Podcast. I am Buck Berlin, the owner-operator of New World Comics. Not with us this week, Stephanie Cerny. She decided that she's too good for this thing. I agree. Helping run the show, Brad Reed, voice of God from Nerds to Men fame.
Blessings, Buck.
Yeah. He's the one who does all the sound equipment and puts us on YouTube and Spreaker and Stitcher and Streaker and
almost
Donner and Blitzen and Rudolph.
Yes, all of those places.
Everywhere that I just listed, go look for the New World Podcast and Nerds to Men.
Yeah.
Joined with us this week is Scott Sackett.
Hey,
there you go.
I didn't know if I should clap for myself.
Yes, always.
Okay, yeah.
When in doubt, always clap for yourself.
Gotcha. If you don't, who will?
Right. Just in case.
Exactly.
Scott, why don't you tell us, who you are and what you do, maybe, perhaps?
Oh, gosh. Who am I? My name is Scott Sackett, as Buck said. I'm a resident of Oklahoma City. I grew up in Yukon, just outside of Oklahoma City, and I think Buck has me on here because I'm an artist that draws comic books.
Yes, and you do the quick sketches during the events. You're one of our resident artists.
Yes, if anyone out there has come up here on Free Comic Book Day, they have a pretty good shot of having one of my drawings.
Yep.
It's funny you mentioned that, Buck, because my wife is always amazed because we will be shopping somewhere and someone will come up to me and start talking to me, and I will go, "How do I know you?" And they'll go, "Oh, you drew my favorite Spider, or you drew something." And I mean, literally, that happened last week. Someone came up to me, and I was like, "I think I know you. How do I know you?" And it was, through that, so, and that's always a lot of fun to do. I'm grateful that you have me out here to do that every year.
Oh, I'm grateful that you do it. Oh my God. It's such a big deal to people. And it's gotten to the thing where it's you, Jerry, and Don as my mainstays. Yeah. You all get it.
We're the workhorses.
Yeah.
For sure.
And it's real funny that there are people that will stand in line longer to make sure that they get a drawing from you or Jerry or Don. It's the...
Well, a lot of them, because we've done it so many years that they have one and they want another one that,
Yeah.
I got Spider-Man, now I want Aunt May or whatever. Yeah.
Right, and it it's just kind of a neat deal that
and if anyone's watching this, that's not to say that we're the best or anything like that. It's just that we've done it the most. Because there are some really good people that do it.
It's the best. Yeah.
Okay, I'll let Buck say it's the
Yes.
best. No, but that's something I really enjoy doing it. I'm always surprised because I'll see the line and I ask people, "How long have you been in line?" And they'll tell me 2 hours. And I'm like, "Are you insane? I would never wait for 2 hours for my drawing."
But it's really neat because it's just a personal thing that if your favorite character is like Red Tornado, you're never going to get a personal drawing.
No one will ever draw Red Tornado for
you,
unless you come to New World and request it at Free Comic Book Day.
Right. So
no, it's a lot of fun. I love doing that. And that's something I've done that for you for quite a few years now.
Yeah,
pretty much since day one, I think, or close to at least as long as you've had artists.
Yeah, I was trying to think about that because I feel like it was about 7 or 8 years ago now that we really had our first big hit.
That seems about right. I've missed one of them since then.
Right.
I had a previous commitment that I couldn't dodge, but
yeah, it was one of those where we were trying to figure out, we knew that Free Comic Book Day was going to be a big deal. It was already a big deal, but we knew that it could be the biggest thing that year.
Yeah.
And, adding artists and the costume people and all that, really put it over the top, and we're like, okay, that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and what's funny is, when I first started doing it, I was very I didn't, I never really. I've always drawn in front of people because I'll draw, but I'd never done it for people while they were watching me, and so it was kind of there was a little bit of stage fright or whatever.
Yeah.
This can you draw while people are watching you, and every year it seems like there's somebody new that comes in and helps you.
Yeah,
and I'm always wondering, because. You're under a lot of pressure.
do you give any advice to help them get over their trepidation?
Yeah, it's funny. At my day job, I said I draw comics. Also, I do have a day job, and at my day job, I work for a company that it's called MTM Recognition, and they make trophies, but they also do, and they do big trophies. We did the Heisman. They just gave the Heisman away. We made that at my place.
They just gave it away?
Well, we didn't give it away. the New York Sportsman's Club or whatever gave it away. But I'm an artist there. I've been there almost 30 years, and I run our department that makes medallions. We do like medallions and coins and stuff like that. And having been there 30 years, the next longest artist has been there 3.
Oh, wow.
And so there's this big experience gap. And so I always, in my work, we're real big on talking about coaching people, because the company was started by a basketball coach. And so they always talk about coaching people up.
Do they just say, all right, guys, take a knee?
Take a knee. Come on. Second half, I expect the defense to be better.
Yeah. We're artists.
What are we defending? I don't know. No, but, so I think the big thing on doing something like that is just not being intimidated.
Okay.
And the same thing with, like, at work, it's just a lot of times what people want to hear from you isn't really instruction, but just reassurance that they can do it.
Okay.
Just a little bit of positivity and a little bit of pep talk. We're recording this the day after Christmas. Yesterday I was at my parents' house, and my nephew is old enough he should be driving. And I'm like, why is he not driving? Well, no one takes him to practice. So I took my sister's car, and we went and we drove. And the first thing I told him was, dude, you can do it. Come on. I think everybody, be it an artist or a kid learning to drive or whatever, you need a little coaching, and you need somebody to tell you, you can do it. So, Buck, you can do it. I have faith in you.
I will see what I can do.
Brad, you can do it. I have faith in you.
So that brings up an interesting point of how did you come into art? Like, were you trained or self-taught or like just,
Well, they always say every artist ultimately is self-taught, but there was a process. When I was a kid, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking when I was a kid, I was really into science fiction. I was in first grade, and I was at some friends at my parents' house, and they had a son that was a couple years older than me, and he was watching this strange show, and there was this guy who had pointed ears, and he was looking through this thing, and he looks up, and he has this, and it was Star Trek, and I'd never seen anything like that, and I was like, this is amazing. He was like, oh, you got to watch this show, and the dad was kind of I don't want to call him a redneck, but he was kind of that. Yeah. He was just like, oh, it's that crazy space stuff. But I watched it, and it really got me. It really kind of, I was probably first grade. I wasn't even reading yet, or just learning to read. Yeah. And out of that, I started reading science fiction. Out of science fiction, I started reading fantasy. Out of that, I got into later. I got into Star Wars, and then at school, I drew all this time. When I was a kid, I drew. I was one of those kids that when I was a kid at church, all the kids stayed in the regular church, and the big kids, the adult church. Yeah. And so I would sit there and draw because there was nothing for kids to do. Yeah. So I draw. Yeah. I have a plate. I have a plate that I made for my mom in first grade from school. Yeah. And it's the deal. They give you a circle of paper and you draw out on there. And I drew for Mother's Day. And so I drew this scene. I drew waves, and I drew boats. I drew men on the boats, and they had guns, and they were shooting at subs, and the subs had Nazi flags, and there were planes dive bombing, and there were Nazi soldiers jumping in the water, and there were sharks eating them. And at the top, I wrote very proudly, "Happy Mother's Day, Mom. Love, Scott."
That's amazing. Oh my God.
And that plate hung on my parents' wall for years. And several years ago, they redid and my mom goes, "Do you want your plate back?"
Really?
I have it at my house still.
God. A true loving mother would have said, "Scott, can I have an updated version?"
She would have said, "I want to be buried with this." Hey, you know what? She may still be buried with it. No, but so I drew when I was a kid. I come from kind of an artistic family. My grandma was an interior decorator. My grandfather was a drummer. My uncle painted. I have a cousin who's a professional artist. And when I was a kid, about the time about the Star Trek, Star Wars time of my life, it was like the late 70s, he was going down to OU, and he worked with my grandma, and so he was always at my grandparents' house. and he was into fantasy, and so he would always give me fantasy books and stuff. He gave me my first Dungeons and Dragons set when I was a kid. Yeah, and so he was an artist, and so I would see him working on school projects, and he was the one. When I was a little kid, he showed me how perspective worked before they ever talked about it in school. Did the train tracks?
Yeah.
Before I ever did that, I knew how perspective worked.
Train tracks and buildings are always
You do the train tracks and then you draw buildings.
That's the moment that you either know that you love making, you love drawing, or it's that. Okay, so it's all a trick.
This is a trick. I'm not doing this.
either you see it as a trick or like a magic door has been opened.
Yeah, and I was definitely like a magic door kid.
Yeah,
and so I got into art, and like a lot of kids, my parents, like I said, I grew up in Yukon, and they had during the summer they would have like classes you could take. Now it'd be kind of like VOTEC, but it wasn't really. It was like community education classes, and. So, and my mom always wanted my brother and I out of the house during the summertime. So she'd enroll us in tennis or baseball or whatever. And so when I started drawing, she'd enroll me in drawing classes.
Oh, cool.
And I mean, it was community education kind of stuff. So it
wasn't a formal thing.
It was very informal, but I learned a lot, and it kind of ignited this love of drawing. And then and sometime about that time, I started getting into comic books. I was at a convention, and I was not talking to a panel, but I was asking a question to the panel. For them to answer their question, you had to tell them what the first comic you ever read was.
Yeah.
Well, my first comic that I remember reading was Fantastic Four #1, but I didn't read it I read it in. There was a record that reprinted
the book and record set. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of my teachers had it in like the 3rd grade, and I read it, and I was like, "This is so cool." But I read that, and then I kind of had some Superman. There was always comics because I have uncles who are like my youngest uncle's about 5 years older than me.
Okay.
And so when I was like a kid, they were teenagers, and so my grandma always got them comic books and stuff, and so I was always around, and they'd read them, and when they got tired of them, they'd give them to me.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I had like all these crazy comics. But it was always a mismatch, so I never really got into it. There wasn't like
because you'd get part 3 of a 5-part
I get like Haunted Tank, or I get House of Secrets, and then I get a Superman, and I get a Daredevil, and so it was hard to really get interested in it.
Here's another story of someone.
Yeah, there's somebody
I may or may not have heard
exactly.
read this guy before.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, but as a kid, I loved them though but I didn't buy them. They all were given to me.
Yeah.
And so I would take them everywhere and read them and stuff. But when I really got into it was when I got a little bit older. The same kid that showed me the Star Trek, they were visiting, and he was older now. He was in the Army. And that family had moved out of town, and he had come back, and they had come back to Yukon, and he was telling me how he'd been over in Germany, and he'd gone to the World Science Fiction Con in Germany that year, whatever year this was. It's probably been late 70s, maybe early 80s. And so he's telling me, he was like, "Oh, are you reading comic books?" And I go, "Well, I read a few here and there." And he goes, "Oh, man, I read this great comic. You got to start reading it. It's called The X-Men." And it was the story, and I think it's issue 114 where they go to the Shi'ar world, and he was telling me the story about the Macron crystal and all this kind of stuff. Like, what in the world? And so he told me about it, but I never. At the time, X-Men, for some reason, well, I grew up in Yukon, so I bought all of my comics off of like the drugstore newsstand. And for some reason, you could never find X-Men. And finally, I got hold of X-Men. I think it's 119, the one where they fought Moses Magnum.
Yeah.
And I bought it at a drugstore, and it had the cover ripped off of it. So it was it was a return comic, but I had that. That was the first X-Men I bought off the stand, and I just loved it. I loved John Byrne's art. And I know one of your questions is who are your influences. And I think, and you know me. I mean, John Byrne is to me
is king. Yeah,
John Byrne is king. I mean, Kirby's king, but John Byrne is king.
Yeah, which I'll say that John Byrne up until like 1995. or so.
Yeah, well,
is the last time that John Byrne was truly great. Like, he's been good, and he'll do great things, but he's not the powerhouse that he once was. And
well,
I think some of it is,
Well, here's what I've discovered about John Byrne. A lot of what I really liked about John Byrne as a kid came from Terry Austin.
Yeah,
I mean I mean, if you look at that run, the one I liked was 119. I believe the issue before that was not inked by Terry Austin. There was one run in John Byrne's run that was not on the X-Men that was not inked by Terry Austin, and it looks terrible. Had I bought that one instead of the other one, I probably wouldn't be a John Byrne fan.
I can see that. Yeah, like Scott Williams on Jim Lee art.
Yeah,
if you look at Jim Lee pencils when he knows that Scott Williams is going to finish it, his pencils are real loose and real sloppy, just because he knows that he can rely on that. There's some Jack Kirby art like that. When he knows that Joe Sinnott's gonna,
and it's funny. It's funny you say that because I was reading a thing recently. It was some book I bought about Jack Kirby, and it was showing how the difference between his early Fantastic Four work and some of the Western stuff he was doing back then.
Yeah.
And that Western stuff is, I mean, I love Fantastic Four, but it's so much more detailed.
Yeah.
Well,
and there was a thing on Comic Book Resources that Brian Cronin does. It's the Comic Book Legends Revealed.
Yeah.
One of them it's talking about Jack Kirby's reverence for Joe Sinnott was such that, and you can tell when you look at other things. The Thing originally was supposed to be a gorilla with dinosaur skin.
Yeah.
Was the idea.
Yeah.
And you can tell when you look at Devil Dinosaur.
Yeah, it's the same kind of texture.
It's the same texture.
Yeah, from the first few issues.
Joe Sinnott sat down and looked at it and was like, I don't know what the hell that is. I think it's rock, so I'm going to draw it like this. And Jack respected him so much that he started drawing the Thing like rock.
Oh, yeah. Well, now, what issue did he start changing?
That's a real good question.
Oh, see,
no,
I warned you I'd ask you questions.
It was kind of a gradual,
right?
Thing,
Yeah.
Because it's over the course of 4 or 5 issues. But
it was pretty early, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's within 30.
Okay,
issues.
that's what I was going to say. Like around the first 20-ish.
Yeah, because I'm thinking back, and it might be within the first 20.
Okay.
But it's pretty early on. So.
Yeah. But so I picked up that issue with Moses Magnum, and I still had trouble finding. It was a while before I found the rest of them.
Yeah.
But I had a friend who he come to my house and he would bring comic books, and he had the other one that I remember reading really early is the arcade one, and I don't know what number that is. It's 122 maybe one. No.
I think
24,
you're right. Yeah.
Something like that. But there's a scene in there that, and I don't know why. I remember seeing this scene. Of course, I've read it all now, but I remember where they go to Lincoln Square in New York. Is it right? Lincoln the opera place or the Lincoln. Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, wherever they go, they're going to watch the opera or whatever, and they go in the elevator, and it's rigged, and they get gassed, and it gets helicoptered out of the roof of it. And to me, that just made such an impression on me as a kid. Just that scene, I don't know why, but that issue. And I mean, I was at that point when I discovered the X-Men, I was hooked. That was the I really liked the Fantastic Four. But the X-Men, I think, were the Fantastic Four were the bait, but the X-Men was really what set the hook for me.
I understand, yeah.
And I don't really know why. Part of it is I really like John Byrne's art. And like I said, a lot of that I liked was Terry Austin because especially, now I have that artist edition, with the X-Men artist edition. Thank you, Buck, for getting that for me. But looking at that and looking at Big, that thing sits on my drawing table, by the way.
Right, which I mean, it's actual art size.
Yeah, for anyone who's not familiar, it is actual art size, and it's shot from the original art, and so you can see it. And it's interesting because I have that book and I have the Fantastic Four one, both of which are John Byrne, but you can the Terry Austin stuff, the X-Men stuff is so clean.
Yes.
It's like looking at the comic. The Fantastic Four one, you can see where like he smudged it and he erased stuff and he whited stuff out. No, man, Austin must have never
super pro on that. Yeah,
he did not drink coffee at his table or anything because it's perfect and it's almost intimidatingly perfect.
Well, yeah, and I mean that's what's real sad with John Byrne is that it looks like he just goes straight to inks anymore.
Yeah. Well, have you seen that new X-Men stuff that he's doing?
I haven't looked at that just because I don't want to get myself too excited.
Oh yeah.
I mean, unless you have any information, which we'll talk about later.
It's funny you say that because I did at the New York Comic Con. I did ask CB Cebulski about that.
Yeah.
At his panel, I stood up and said, there was a picture of you that came out of you, this is CB Cebulski, shaking a creator's hand at Boston. I said, would this be a good time for you to announce something? And he's like, and basically what he said is the door, I talked to him and the door is open if we can work it out. He'd like to. If everyone's listening, I've known CB Cebulski for years,
which is so cool because
he's like the editor-in-chief of Marvel, and
yeah.
I've hung out with him in New York, and it's weird because I'm not a pro. I mean, if I were a pro, that'd be no big deal because he does that. But I've taken him out for burgers and hung out with the guy, but.
Well, and the minute that I heard that he was taking over for Marvel, I was like, oh, he's the perfect dude because he
is
the Ultimate Alliance games that he wrote, those kind of have the best representation of a lot of those characters, and it shows his love of Marvel.
Yeah,
and it's okay, so we've found our guy.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
I've known CB. I'll look in the camera and say this. I've known CB for since 2001, I think. And I mean, again, we're not.
So it was right before he really.
Right when he first started at Marvel, I met him in San Diego, and he gave me his card and said, keep in touch. And so I did. And then the next time, it was about 6 months after that, I visited New York for the first time ever. And so I just emailed him and said, hey, what are the chances I get a tour? And he's like, call me when you get here. And so I called him, and he gave me a tour. I spent an entire afternoon at Marvel Comics.
That is so cool.
And we were the only two people in the building.
Really?
Yeah, it was weird. I mean, we're the only two people on the editorial floor.
Huh.
I sat in Joe Quesada's chair.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, he had a great office. It was like a corner office, and you could see down the street. It was really cool.
Man.
But anyway, I've known CB for a long time. CB really loves comics. He loves Marvel Comics. Some of the people that have been put in positions of power at different companies, you kind of wonder because they did other magazine stuff or whatever.
Right.
But CB is not like that. I mean, I think he, don't get me wrong, I think he's like a corporate guy. I mean, he knows how to play the Disney game.
I think that he is a company man, but not necessarily a corporate guy.
Okay. Yeah. I would agree with that. That's a good way to put it because. And I'm not trying to say anything bad about him at all. I mean, he's a friend of mine. I mean, he texted me the other day.
Listen, as a business owner, I have no problem looking at someone knowing that they're a company man.
Yeah,
like there's something definitely to be respected about that.
You want him to make money.
Yeah.
Because, if he makes money, you're making money. Or theoretically.
Right. Well,
if you're making money, he's making money.
And if someone sees someone doing a job, doing a thing that, that they see, that they align themselves with, like they're only going to make something better from it.
Right.
Like if you don't believe in something and you're
Yeah, no. He's not a.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's been a lot of talk lately in comics about, people are just getting into comics because they want to get into movies or something like that.
Yeah,
this is not
not a stepping stone. Yeah.
Marvel's not a stepping stone.
He's going to be the editor for 20 years or more. Like he's going to be a Roy Thomas or a,
unless they catch him doing something weird or something.
I mean, there was the misstep, up front when they found out. Yeah. Which,
if he could survive that, maybe he could survive anything.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the most damning thing.
Probably. Yeah. Well, I think he's in a good position. I think he's where he wants to be.
Well, because he's definitely not a yes man. Like
No, I don't think he is.
He's made some changes, which man, if I could just get 10 minutes of
You want his number? You could text him.
Oh my God, he would absolutely kill you. Hey, this is Buck from New World Comics.
Scott gave me your number.
Yeah, but I mean, like,
I should give it out on the podcast.
Oh, you totally should. So, no. But I mean, little things that would help the industry is, not rebooting comic series every time a new creative team comes on. Like,
yeah, and
over the summer, I had some kids trying to sort out comics, and they were so lost. Like,
why there's 7 number ones?
You're right.
Yeah,
and
how many X-Men books are there now?
Oh, well, now just one.
Oh, have they gone back to one again?
Yeah.
What about the gold and red and blue? And
all those got canceled in favor of just doing one weekly X-Men book.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
I haven't been to the store lately.
Yeah. You've been busy.
I've been busy.
Yeah. But, no, like that's the worst thing, honestly, is anyone who's trying to get in. Yeah.
I agree.
It looks like they don't have enough faith in their own product to say, hey, here's issue 57.
Right.
They're
trying. It looks like they're trying to bump up the numbers artificially.
Yeah, they either want the number in the hundreds of issues or they want things in the teens.
Well, and I don't like how now a lot of the stuff seems to have gone to like a mini series.
Right.
It's like, oh, well, we'll do this book. Well, let's do it as because going back to my original story about when I was a kid and I'd get a comic here and a comic there.
Yeah.
How do you build up a readership if you have 5 issues and then you stop for 6 months?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you do.
No, and the way that comics used to work was you'd get one issue that told one story, even though it would be an overarching thing. Like when you read Fantastic Four, you felt like you were with the team, not just for that story.
Yeah.
Like the stories now are almost very, very intimate, just because like you were getting only that chunk of story, whereas you'd read one issue, get the action that happened, and then you'd have the changes of relationship and references to other things over the course of 12 issues,
right?
15 issues.
It does seem to me, and again, I mean, I'm not trying to tell people how to do their job or whatever, but it does. Well, I guess I am. It does seem like the pacing is off on a lot of books nowadays.
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with the way that Bendis came in and changed the writing for the trade paperback format.
Right.
Because when you look at Spider-Man comics, you can't really look at them like you do Batman comics, because Batman comics you can do the read this one story. This is the greatest.
Yeah.
Whereas Spider-Man has good comics kind of overall, but there's not just one like, oh, here definitely.
It's a different character.
Yeah.
Yeah. Batman tends to be, at least my impression of Batman is that Batman tends to be that you have kind of a build up and then he fights it. It's almost like a video game or something. There's this build up and then he fights the boss and then that arc is over.
Yeah.
And Spider-Man I don't think works that way.
Not really. Like you either have like one issue that's really good or you have like the eventual like, oh, here's Kraven's Last Hunt.
Yeah.
Or it's like Kraven's Last Hunt, the kid who collected Spider-Man, or here's Dan Slott's run of enjoy 300 issues, kids. It's
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Okay, so where were we? We were talking about me. Let's go back to talking about me.
You just got into to John Byrne.
Oh, okay. So then when I was a kid, I was into John Byrne, and I would growing up in Yukon, I had trouble getting consistent issues of stuff because I was getting off at the drugstore, and so what I did is about the time I was 12, 13, I started mowing lawns, and so I would mow. I had like 5 lawns I'd mow every week, and I made $20 a pop. So I would save that money, and then I would subscribe. Mm-hmm. And they had a deal where you could get 3. You could get if you bought 3 subscription, or if you subscribed 3 comics, you got a 4th one.
Right.
And so I always did Fantastic Four, X-Men, Avengers, and something else. And one year, and I did this for a couple of years. I know one year John Byrne did the first 2 issues of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yep.
So I subscribed to that. He didn't do any other issues.
Oh.
And it was what it was. I did 1 year I did Star Wars. I think I did Star Wars for a couple of years because I was when I was a kid I was really into Star Wars.
Well, and I mean those comics were really fun.
The comics were good. I enjoyed them, and like I was into Star Wars. and as I got older, I kind of got burned out on it. I was
sure.
what year did it come out?
77.
Yeah, so I was 10 when Star Wars came out. So I was the perfect age to see Star Wars.
Yeah.
But then by the time Empire came out,
You were kind of...
I was
yeah.
kind of,
Yeah. So you were 20. Yeah. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But okay, so comics go along. I'm reading comics. I'm drawing, and I would draw comics a little bit when I was a kid, but not seriously, because I knew when I was, and this is weird, I still can't explain this to myself, but I was under the impression that if you wanted to draw comics, you had to live in New York. But yep, my favorite comic artist was John Byrne. I know he lived in Canada. I knew he lived in Canada. I don't know how. I guess I was a dumb kid.
Well, but I mean,
I guess I thought he commuted. I don't know.
Well, but I mean, for some, they did.
Well, yeah, but he didn't. When he was doing
he mailed it in. Yeah,
but I for some reason I thought you had to live in New York.
I mean, you kind of needed to live northeast, really.
Well,
or you needed to be in California, and they could, yeah. But
so I didn't really see comics as a thing I could do when I was a kid. I would draw them, and I would draw superheroes, but I just like to draw stuff.
Yeah.
And I read comics, and I read science fiction. I played Dungeons and Dragons. I played video games. I was big into video games. And then about the time I turned 16, I got a job at a taco place making tacos. I got a car, and comics went up from, and you could probably tell me the price, from like, I think they were 50 cents. They went up to 75, or maybe
they went up to 60.
60.
Yeah.
And this was about the same time that John Byrne quit the Fantastic Four. Mm-hmm. And I dropped comics cold.
Okay.
I literally stopped reading comics. I stopped drawing even for a while. And all I was into at that point was cars and girls.
No, I understand. And there are a lot of people that dropped comics. I almost dropped comics. I got to the point where I was kind of sick of the current stuff that was coming out at the time, and I would come in here and almost exclusively buy back issues.
Oh, really?
And there was one day that I came in, I was like, man, if I don't see anything that catches my eye, I'm done. And then, lo and behold, Fantastic Four 1 was in the case. I was like, oh. And that was the make or break thing. And then, it all changed from there.
Oh my gosh! Yeah. That's like I'm going to try this, and it's like, oh, here's some whatever addictive drug.
Well, because
try this meth.
I knew that I still loved comics, but it was why is this not catching me? And then I saw that, and it was oh no, this is my future.
It drew you back in.
Yeah, it was here. Because I mean back then. It was under $2,000. Like it was very affordable.
Under $2,000 is affordable.
Well, I mean, compared to now,
yeah.
Where any of those things are just completely
Buck
astronomical.
Got a heck of an allowance. That's all.
No, I earned it the old-fashioned way. As Kurt put it. As Kurt put it, I inherited it.
He earned it the hard way.
No, I had a small inheritance from my great-grandparents.
Okay.
So it was meant for college, but I used it to buy a comic book, a car, and then some college.
That's okay.
And then
but you ended up buying a store.
Well, yeah. I dropped out of college to buy a store.
You know what? You probably got more use out of the money than if you'd gone to college and drank.
Right. Well, I mean, I did get a job 6 months after I bought the comic. So.
And what's that comic worth now? Do you still have it, or
so there's
you'll have that exact one?
Okay, so all right, I guess now's a good time as any that I tell this often.
No,
so there came a point in the store where we weren't doing incredibly well. I could use some money, but there's this girl that I really liked.
Okay,
and it came time to propose.
Oh.
So I had this buddy Brad who was Brad Cage.
Okay,
yeah, Brad Cage who had been looking for a Fantastic Four 1 for a long time.
Yeah,
and I finally made the decision of, all right, I like this girl more than I like this comic.
Oh, there you go.
So I sold it to him.
Oh.
Yeah. And Brad was going through like terrible, awful cancer at the time. Like,
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like it is a miracle that he's here, kind of stuff. Like it was bad. Like,
Yeah. So wait,
So-
why are we laughing?
well,
Because it ended well. That's
yeah,
why. That's why we're
'cause it
laughing.
ended well. So I sold it to him and got the ring and all that, and then the wife and I did the destination wedding just because we have so many friends and family that we had to pare down, and she said, okay, well, you get so many people, and I had my immediate family and then customers from the store that
Right.
are family to me.
I got you.
And she didn't quite understand it at the time. Like, hey, why are the cages coming? And then at the wedding, he gave it back to me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
my
he's just-
gosh.
he told me that when he was going through the cancer, I was the only one who treated him normal. Like even his like close friends were like, "Dude, I'll pray for you. How are you?" And
Yeah.
they wouldn't. They
Yeah.
would just be weird.
Yeah, I got you.
And that's just not me. Like
No, you're just always weird. It's
yeah.
the difference.
No, because like I'd sit and make fun of like he had colorectal cancer, and I was
right.
like, "How's the colorectal cancer?" I did that. Brad, how's the pain in the ass today? He said, "Oh man, it's a killer." And we joke like that,
Right.
And like I would never like, man, I'm praying for. I hope you pull through. Like,
Yeah,
no,
you
'cause-
did. Yeah, you kind of lightened it up a little.
Yeah, and because like it's tough going through all the pain and all that other stuff, but it's dealing with all the other people that's pretty awful.
I could see that. I could see that.
Yeah, so
So
yeah.
he gave you the comic back.
Yeah.
Oh
in
my
the, in the
gosh.
condition that if ever I divorce the wife, it goes back to him. So, which isn't going to happen. Because, I mean,
no. Your wife is cool.
Yeah, for anyone who's met my wife, she is absolutely the most amazing person.
It's funny you say that though, because you were willing to sell your comic to get a ring. I have told my wife, because I draw comics and it just takes it so much time.
Yeah.
I mean, I come home from work, I wolf down some food, and I go sit in my studio and draw all night. And my wife is completely cool with that, but I have to, we went to New York for vacation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the vacation was wrapped around New York Comic Con. So
Yeah.
for 4 days, I was gone to the convention, and she would text me and go, "When are you leaving?" And I would try and leave early, but I have told her forever that if she ever says, "Okay, no more, you can't draw," I'm tired, then I'll do it. I'll give it up because my wife is more important to me than drawing comics.
Right, and that's when you know that you've definitely found someone. Do you sacrifice all for
Right,
and not like the I sacrifice. It's no. I would gladly give this up for
right. Oh, absolutely.
and it wouldn't be a begrudging thing, But
What's interesting is I've met guys, like I mentioned, I have a bunch of artists that work with me, and over the years I've worked with guys who have told me, "Oh, I wish my wife would let me go home and draw, but we go home, she wants me to sit on the couch and watch TV with her or whatever."
yeah.
And so my wife has always been very supportive of my art career, and it would be tough to be married to somebody that wasn't. But on the
Right.
flip side, I would give it up.
See, I mean, if
There's kind of a balance.
yeah,
there.
I would say if it's important to you, then that's grounds for discussion. The best marital advice I was given is if it's important to one of you, it's important to both of you.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And if there's not a happy medium to be found there in something as innocent as drawing,
You're right.
then
yeah.
maybe
Right,
maybe
yeah.
you all should talk
Yeah.
things out. But
My wife always says marriage is a lifetime of compromise, which I always look at her funny, like, "Oh yeah."
yeah, and I mean there are times that Karen and I will argue over something, and it's the hold on. All right, sorry, it's important to you. Let's go do this thing. Or she'll do the wait, no. All right, you really want to do this? Let's go.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you got to make time for your spouse, time and space.
So I mean,
Okay. So am I going back to my story?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me go back to my story. So I quit comics. I quit reading comics. I quit doing art. I went. And then came time to graduate high school. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was kind of adrift in the world. the cars and the girls weren't working out for me. And so I decided that I was going to wait a semester to go to college, and I wanted to work just to kind of see what life was really like. And I went and I got a job working at a car lot delivering auto parts, and I realized life sucks. No, I realized if you don't have something to offer to an employer, then they're not going to pay you diddly. You know, when you're a kid, you think the world is just going to open up and give you all its vast bounty. But I realized you have to bring something to the table. And so about that time, I'd been out a semester, and my grandmother said, if you go to SNU, which is Southern Nazarene University, which is a private Christian school, she says, if you'll go to school there, I'll pay for your school.
Oh, wow.
So I said, okay, I'll do that. And so I quit my job, and there were a lot of personal things that happened. It was kind of one of those times in life where you feel like a chapter is closed. I broke up with a longtime girlfriend and that sort of thing. And so I went to college, and I was there I was originally an architecture major. They didn't really offer an architecture degree, but I was getting like basics and stuff, like history and stuff, and I took some drawing classes and stuff. And I went to my first then my professor said, or my advisor said, You're a semester behind. We got to enroll you in 2 math classes. And I said, are you sure about that? And he's like, oh, yeah, you can do this. Oh, wow. So he enrolled me in college algebra and trig. And I'd had algebra in high school, like in the 9th grade, and that was the last math class I'd had.
Yeah.
Went to the first trig class, and he did kind of a let's see where everybody's at test. And I was like, I will fail this class if I don't get out of it. And so I ended up changing my major. I had a cousin who was a commercial artist, which was kind of a weird thing that really doesn't exist now, but it was like you did artwork for advertising, basically.
Yeah, like you'd have to draw like a chair.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
because the printing technology wasn't such that you could, put in a picture.
Right, yeah. You
like
could,
a photograph.
Yeah, you could put in like a halftone, but it looked better if it were a drawing or even just like laying out the ads.
Yeah.
And so I switched my major to that. And then a friend of mine had gone to a place called Platt College. Mm-hmm. And so I went a semester of that, and I decided I wanted to get married. And so I quit SNU, and I got married, and I enrolled in Platt. And I hadn't read comics this whole time. And when I was at Platt, there was a guy who was a professor there, or like an assistant professor, who he started after I'd been there for a little bit. By the name of Mike Kennedy. Yeah. Now, you know Mike Kennedy, right?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, Mike Kennedy, for any listeners or viewers who don't know, Mike Kennedy used to own or co-own Planet Comics down on the south side here in Oklahoma City. And Mike had gone to school with my friend, David Nelson, who I do a podcast with, who's the guy that had gone to Platt before me. And I had met Mike through David, and Mike was doing a comic book at the time, and I thought that was really cool. He was doing a comic book called Chuck the Barbaric, and I didn't know anybody that drew comic books then. I'd forgotten about comic books basically, and so then I'd met Mike through Dave, and then I went to Platt, and then here shows up Mike, and they hire him as like a student or like an assistant teacher or whatever, and. So Mike is like doing these comic books. He did Chuck, and he did something with, I forget the name of it, with some girls. It was like a girl superhero team. And then he would work on it a little bit in class. I was watching. I was like, this is cool. And what really got me back into comics, though, was Mike had a watch. And at the time, I was really into Swatch watches. Okay. If you remember the Swatch watches, for any listeners who may not know, are these rubber watches. They're real cheap, but back in the 80s, they were real popular, and I was kind of into them. And he had this one that had the smiley face on it. I said, "What is that? Is that a Swatch watch?" And he said, "No." He said, "I got it at the store." He said, "It's a promo. It's a promo for this comic book." And I go, "What's the comic book?" He says, "It's called Watchmen." Oh. And I go, "What?" And he told me about it. I said, "That sounds cool."
There you go. That'll do it.
And so and at the time I was delivering auto parts because I was going to school at night. I'd gone back to an auto parts job, and I came by here one day, and Barry Burris sold me a trade. Watchmen had come out and trade, and he sold me a trade of Watchmen, and so I bought it and I read it. And I was like, "This is crazy!" And then and I got to apologize because I didn't buy it from Mike. But I live up here, so anyway, out of that, then not long after I graduated, the Batman movie came out. Mm-hmm. And the Batman movie, for some reason, they kept saying, "Oh, it's like the Dark Knight Returns," which is not.
I mean, it's a darker Batman.
But they compared it to that.
I mean, I could see where if all you knew was Adam West Batman,
then it would be.
Then it's very much.
Well, and so then out of that,
also the television talking heads and
there's some of it, but not.
It's like they took Dark Knight and they rubbed it all over Adam West Batman. Hey, here you go.
But that movie was huge, and I had a birthday coming up, and I said, "Oh, I want this Dark Knight Returns trade paperback." And so for a long time I had, and somewhere along the way I got a copy of the Death of Phoenix or the Dark Phoenix saga trade paperback. So at one point when I was married, I had no comics in my apartment. I had 3 trade paperbacks. I had the Dark Phoenix saga, I had the Watchmen, and I had the Dark Knight Returns.
Okay.
And then when I got out of school, I started getting money. I started buying comics. I'd like, okay, let's see what's John Byrne doing. He was doing X-Men. I started picking that up. I started reading X-Men. This is embarrassing. I thought Rob Liefeld was great. I really that whole '90s thing.
I will say he draws a dynamic picture. The anatomy is terrible.
Well, people rag on Rob a lot, but he's not a good artist, but he's not a bad artist.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I'll give you that. Like, I mean, there are some drawings that he does that are bad. They're terrible.
You can pick out individual stuff and be like, "This is terrible."
But overall, like he's not a bad storyteller.
He's not a bad storyteller.
I'll say that.
And he was when he was doing X-Force. I remember I was picking up X-Force, and one of them in there was a fill-in issue somebody else did, and whoever was, and I can't remember who it was, but it was a drop in quality.
Yeah.
So I mean, whatever you say about him, he was better than the guys that were filling in for him. So somewhere in there, my wife went back to. This is all coming up to me making comics, by the way. So somewhere in there, my wife went back to school. She had when we were first married, she was going to school and she got a degree in like construction technology, and which was kind of a precursor to like an engineering degree.
Okay.
And so she was working in an engineering firm. They said, if you go back to school, we'll hire you as an engineer. And so she went back to school, and about the same time she went back to school, like our TV died, and so I had to find something to do that was kind of quiet. My wife, she can't study if there's anything noisy in the house.
I understand, yeah.
And so I had to find something quiet to do, and so I for some reason I got in my head that I wanted to write, and so I started writing. So I was reading comics, and I was writing, and I'd written some stuff, and about the time, sometime in the late 90s, I let Mike Kennedy read one of my stories that I'd written, and he goes, this would make a cool comic book. And I thought, yeah, I could see that. And so I thought, well, how to start drawing it? and so I started drawing the characters and stuff, and I realized, man, I'm terrible at this. I really suck at this. And so I started drawing, and then I picked up a copy of How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, and I started, and it's kind of embarrassing because I was working as a professional artist. I mean, I was
right.
But drawing comics are it's kind of a different skill set, and certainly from what I do day to day. And so I started drawing comics, and this went through like the 90s. At some point, I got brave enough. I started sending samples in, and like in 2000, I went out to San Diego. I had a deal with my wife. I'd go every other year, so I went in 2000, and I met Chris Claremont. He reviewed my portfolio there. Len Wein reviewed it.
Oh, that's cool.
I met. San Diego was a lot different back then. You could walk up and talk to people.
Yeah, like it wasn't just this. I mean, it was still a massive.
It was massive,
people.
but it was
60,000 or under.
Right.
Like it, the year I went was the year before the big.
Yeah. And the big thing was it wasn't real expensive to go to.
Yeah.
I mean, we got hotel rooms for like $60 a night.
Yeah.
And now there's so much money and so much that everybody there has to make their money back.
Yeah, and so, it's almost not worth going if you're going for a business.
Yeah, I at one point I decided I wasn't going to go anymore until it made sense professionally to go, just because it got so expensive.
Right.
And my wife doesn't like San Diego. She didn't like going to San Diego, so she'll go to New York, and that works out better for me. So, and it works out better for her, and she has fun. But so I started going to San Diego. I started some, and it's funny, leading up to this, I was kind of looking over some old artwork, because I have a blog where I've logged all my old submissions I've put in.
Yeah.
I think it's called artofscottsackett.blogspot.com or something. But it goes through chronological. It tells a story, tells who I showed them to, what they said about it, that
that's
sort
cool.
of thing. It's kind of cool. I like looking at it because I figured out today, I think at this point I've drawn like over 700 pages, which is crazy to think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that much, but I've never worked on more than a single issue of anything.
Right.
Until now. I got the script for the second issue of my book right now. I got it today.
Which actually, do you want to plug your?
Yeah. Well, let me talk about that in a second. I don't know. I don't know how we're doing on time. We're way over, aren't we?
No, we're not quite.
Okay.
There, yeah, and yeah, there's 2 points that I want to get to, and then we'll start the wrap up then.
Okay. But anyway, so I got to San Diego, and I was on a cycle where I would send in submissions every couple of months, then I would time it to where I had something to take out to San Diego. Out there is where I talked about meeting CB.
Yeah.
At some point, I went to some other shows and met some other people. I went to the big turning point, I guess, in my career was at one point CB, I'm going to say introduced me, but it was via email to a guy named Bon Amiglio, I think is how you pronounce his last name. And at the time, CB was kind of pulling back. CB used to be the talent scout for Marvel, and he was kind of pulling back from that. And Bon took that over for him. And CB introduced me to Bon and said, "Hey, Bon, this is Scott. Will you send him?" He had him send me sample scripts. And so he sent me like a dozen sample scripts that I drew. And so I would draw them, and I sent him one every other month. And I progressively got better. And I did one that I really liked. It was an Avengers story. And it just so happened to come around to Chicago. And I took it to Chicago. And in Chicago, I was at a panel, and there was a guy that stood up. In fact, it was a How to Break Into Marvel panel. And a guy stood up, and he said, well, because they always talk about artists. Guy stood up and said, "How does a writer break in? I'm a writer. You don't talk about writers." And they answered him and stuff. Well, I went after the panel, and I went and talked to that guy, because my theory was if the guy was willing to go to the convention, he was serious. He stood up and asked his question. He was, kind of committed. And so I went and talked to him, and I just said, "Hey, I'm an artist. I'm always looking for a writer to work with, trying to get something going." And so I dropped him off those Avengers pages. And the next day he tracked me down the showroom floor, and we put together this story. We talked a little bit, and we did a crime story called the Big Easy Score. Mm-hmm. And it's about these criminals that hear about this hurricane that's supposed to hit New Orleans, and so they're going to go, and they've heard through the grapevine that there's some rare gems that some gang has. And so they're going to go there and do it. Well, the hurricane ends up being Katrina. Oh. And so they were kind of unprepared for what happened. And it's kind of the story of that. And now that, just recently a movie came out called Hurricane Heist. Yeah. And I had emailed Brian, and I go, "Oh, I think they ripped us off, man." But anyway, but we did that, and we couldn't sell it. We did it. And when we did it, there was a lot of crime books out. And literally, in the time it took us to put it together, the market just changed. Yeah. And so I pitched it to, and we were each pitching it to people. And I was pitching it to everybody I'd met over the years, and I'd met somebody from Viper Comics. Yeah. And so I pitched it to this guy. I emailed the guy, I met you at San Diego. I'm working on this comic. Is it okay if I pitch? And so I sent him the finished book, and he emailed me back, and he goes, "I really like this." He goes, "We have a monthly meeting where we look over submissions, and the 3 editors all get together, and you're supposed to bring something to the meeting." He says, "I'm going to bring this to the meeting and pitch it as a book that we should put out, and we'll vote on it." And so he said, "I'll let you know." And so like a couple of days later, he emailed me, and he goes, "I went to the meeting." He said, "Everybody liked it except for somebody said, we're not doing crime books anymore. We're going more towards children's books. And so I was like, oh. And so I said, well, did you like the art? And he goes, well, yeah, we loved the art. And I go, I could draw something for you.
Yeah.
And so he gave me a story called Caged, which they were doing like an anthology book, and it was like 18 pages, I think, or 12 pages, or something like that. And I drew that, and the book never got put out.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy that was editing it the project just collapsed.
Right.
And so then but I was able to put on my resume, I'm doing this thing for Viper. Out of that, I got a book called Jack Spade, which was Jack Spade was my first paying gig, and it was a superhero story set in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. I love that book. I love that character. I love that story. I love drawing. We were talking earlier about New Orleans. It was so cool. And it was supposed to be, the writer was putting it together, and it was a super anthology, and it collapsed. All these things I've worked on have collapsed.
Well,
I've had the worst luck.
Maybe you should just try harder, Scott.
Maybe I should. Well, and so, but then what happened is, out of that, I ended up working I did probably a dozen stories for a company called Greyhaven. And what was great is they did anthologies, and I would do like 4 and 6 page stories. And it was great because for a period of about 2 years, I didn't have to think about what I was going to draw. They just were constantly feeding me scripts.
Cool.
And they didn't pay, unfortunately. They paid in books.
Yeah.
but it allowed me to get better. And it was kind of a deal where I felt like I was working where some place no one would really see it, but it was being published, and so I got a lot of credits out of that. And then I did a few other things, and then last year, and this is kind of the current, and I've done so many pitches with people. I've gotten to where I won't do pitches with people because, and so like last year, in not 2018 but 2017, I went to New York Comic Con, and I was kind of burned out. It's like I'm not getting any younger. All these things I'm working on, nothing happened. It was just annoying. And so I went and I met a guy at a place called Source Point Press. Mm-hmm. And I just went to the booth and I said, and I do this every con. I went up and I said, are you looking at portfolios? Are you hiring artists? I'm an artist. I'm looking for something. And they said, let's talk why don't you talk to Travis? And so and this is a first at a con for me. He said, come around here. Where I've walked up and cold, they've said, come over here. And he sat, just like you and me are talking, we sat behind the table. And I told him my story. I told him, I got this good day job. And I said, I do all these things and I'll get like, $50 or $60, $70 a page, but it never gets published or something happens or whatever. And I said, really, I'm not worried about. I don't care about making $300 on a gig. I mean, I don't need the $300. It's always nice, but I don't need it. I'd rather work on something that's a serious project, And he said, well, you need to find a writer's the right level. He said, the problem is you're working with writers that are at the same level you're at, and so you're trying to get your project up here. He said, you need to find a writer's working on stuff up here that'll elevate you. Yeah. He said if you get somebody too low, they can't push you up. If you get somebody too high, they're not interested in you.
Right.
You got to find your right level of collaborator.
Yeah.
And so he introduced me to a guy named Greg Wright. Actually, he gave me his contact information. Greg wasn't at New York Comic Con, and I contacted him, and we called and we talked on the phone. And so Greg and I did can I hold this up?
Yeah.
Is it? I don't know. Am I aiming? Is it getting it? Okay. So Greg pitched me. When I called Greg, he pitched me probably a dozen things. I could tell he was reading from like a notebook or something, a list. And one of the things he said was, I got an idea for a book. It's called Heaven's Rejects. And he said it's like Charlie's Angels, but instead of girls getting kicked out of the police academy, they're angels that really get kicked out of heaven, and they come to earth and fight crime. And I go, dude, that sounds awesome.
That sounds ridiculous.
And I said, that's awesome. I said, so of all these things, what do you have scripts written? He goes, well, the only one I have a full script for is Heaven's Rejects. And so I felt that was a sign.
Yeah.
And it's kind of morphed a little bit. What's funny is he told me it's Charlie's Angels. Now, I saw Charlie's Angels as a kid in the 70s. He's a little younger than me. Not much, but a little bit. But I think his exposure may have been from the movies.
Oh.
So, but I immediately said, okay, I'm setting it in the 70s.
Yeah.
And so I have purposely drawn, and we don't say it in the book, but everything is drawn. All their clothing I've referenced like.
Well, and that's better that you don't have to like 70s like.
Yeah, no. I don't want it
for itself. Yeah.
And we've talked about it. We've kind of agreed after I drew it, and I said, oh, by the way, everything it's set in the 70s. They're all wearing 70s fashion.
Yeah.
And he's cool with that, and he's kind of played with that a little bit. And it's much crazier than that. It's got Hellboy wrapped into it. They don't really fight crime. They fight demons. They fight hellworms. They fight zombies.
Oh, cool.
It's going to end up. Well, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but it's going to be a 4-issue series, and it's going to end up in a, we'll call it a homage to Cannonball Run to redeem themselves. And in the time that we've been working on this, unfortunately, Burt Reynolds has passed, and so Burt Reynolds unofficially is going to be in this comic. I don't know how, but I'm going to draw him in the 4th issue somehow, and he will be called the Bandit. But anyway, that's what I'm working on now. I did that. It took us a while to get it going, and we still. This is a preview that I printed for New York Comic Con. The colors hadn't colored it yet. This year, and we did this all on spec. You know, this publisher put us together. He told me, he goes, I was talking to him later because I'm a part of a thing called Comics Experience, which is a school that put on by Andy Schmidt that you join, and they always have a get together at New York Comic Con. And Source Point Press is their official publisher.
Yeah.
And so they were there, and I saw him there, and I go, hey, I just talked to you. And he goes, oh, yeah. And I talked to him for a long time. Super cool guy, Travis. And so I was talking to him. I said, well, you know, and he said, look, he said, I'll tell you something. He goes, I will print anything that Greg writes. And I go, oh, really? And he realized I was working on a book with him, and he goes, well, probably. And he goes, no. And you know, I hate to talk about stuff that's not a thing until it's a thing.
Yeah.
But I talked to Travis. I took one of these to Travis. Travis hadn't even seen the book. We've done it.
Oh, wow.
And he hadn't seen any of it. Greg just kind of worked on it. But, I mean, Greg and Travis are good friends.
Yeah.
And I showed it to Travis, and Travis was like, this is awesome. I want to publish it. He said,
cool.
He said, you guys, until we get something signed, he said, you're welcome to pitch it to whoever. But he said, I think this will be good. He said, I think this will, he said, I can sell this book. He said, we'll sell tons of them. Source Point Press. Now, again, nothing's a thing until it's a thing. Source Point Press goes to 60 conventions a year. Greg's previous book has sold like 10 or 15,000 copies.
Oh, wow.
And it was the Halloween thing.
Yeah,
Source Point Press had a monstrous.
Yes,
that was Greg's book. And so anyway, so that's what I'm working on now. Then that's kind of the story of my life in a 2-hour nutshell.
Yeah.
So what else do you have for me? That was question 1.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, it hit most of the things that
I'm thorough.
So, actually, it covered that too. I guess the last question before we get to one of my favorite moments with you and my store stories. How do you stave off burnout, or if you sit down and don't know what to draw, how do you get inspiration?
You know, it's funny. I love to draw. My wife and I just traveled, and I had a sketchbook with me everywhere. There's a sketchbook in my bag over there.
Right.
I am never without my sketchbook. I'm always drawing. I'm always pushing myself, trying to get better. I just joined this thing called New Masters Academy, which is where you watch draw. It's like instructional videos. And so I love drawing. Drawing the comics. To me, if you have a collaborator, it really helps.
Okay.
Because when I was doing all those samples, when I did like 1,000 pages of samples, it was difficult because it was me either writing them or getting them somewhere. But when you have a collaborator,
you feel accountable.
Well, you feel accountable, but you also feel like when I read Greg's scripts, they're so surprising, and I mean that in a good way.
Yeah,
but I'm constantly like, this is cool. I want to draw this.
So yeah, you just feel not alone.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And I think I think if someone is out there and they say, well, I want to draw comics, I think, but Mario White.
Yeah.
You know Mario.
Yeah.
Mario gave me some of the best advice I'll ever get in terms of like making comics. And his thing was, whatever the problem is, the solution is draw more.
Yeah, pretty much.
And he was like, if you're discouraged about drawing comics, draw more. If you're having a hard time drawing comics, draw more.
Well, one of the best, because I draw a little, not.
Oh, yeah.
But early on, before I took over the store, I was like, man, I might want to go into comics. You're like, okay, do you like drawing toasters? I said, not particularly. He says, well, you need to learn to love toasters, because if you can draw a toaster and draw it a lot, then it turns out you love drawing and you can draw whatever you want.
Yeah, it's like when you were talking about perspective.
Yeah.
There's a point when you're drawing, like when you're a kid, you like drawing cool stuff.
Yeah.
And I think there's something in your brain if you're an artist that like clicks and you're like, I like drawing stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes a while. And I think for everybody it takes a while, because you're initially attracted because you're like, well, I'm going to draw the Ninja Turtles or whatever. And so you draw the Ninja Turtles, but you're like, I don't want to draw them standing in front of a fire hydrant. Well, then at a certain point you're like, I want to draw everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and there are some people that only draw the characters and
you got no backgrounds.
Yeah, and that'll only get you so far.
Well, depends on the company you're working for.
Well, but I mean, even then, like,
yeah, no. You have to draw backgrounds, and you have to draw. You have to be able to draw. I mean, cars. The worst. I mentioned working for Greyhaven. I got a script from him one time, and it was a Western. So I draw tons of horses, and there was a scene that it was like, okay, in this first panel, there's a I don't know what you call them, a crowd, an army of 1,000 Indians in this cave, and there's a man in the middle talking, and you can see that it's some certain general. They sent me the reference.
Yeah.
Is this general? And that was one panel of like 8 on that page.
Oh, my God.
I'm like, so it's this big.
Yeah. Get out the fine point.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, yeah, I'll make it look just like that general.
Yeah. Done.
Yeah, exactly. Dot the I's.
So, I mean, do you ever sit down and just have, like, I guess, writers have writer's block, but artists have do you ever sit down and, like, how do I get my brain around that? Yeah,
well, okay, I'll tell you this. When it comes to comics, the secret that and this will save you a lot of money if you're out there, because I took some classes through the comics experience. I think I spent $400 to learn this advice, so I'll give you this for free. The trick is never have a blank page, okay? And so what you do is, if you're doing comics, what I do is I'll draw thumbnails that are about 1 inch or 2 inches by 3 inches.
Okay.
And actually, in the script, I'll draw little notes of what I want on the panel, on the page, in each panel, and then I'll draw. When I figure out what I want, I'll draw it at 2 inches by 3 inches, okay. And I'll draw it pretty tight for that size, and I'll figure out. And then what I'll do is I'll scan it, and I'll blow it up to drawn size, and I will clean it up a little bit in the computer, and I'll go in and I'll put the gutters in there.
Yeah.
So it has all the panels lined out and everything, but it's got my thumbnails in there, but they're blown up, so they're kind of rough. Then I'll flip it in the computer digitally in Photoshop. I'll flip it, and then I print it on the back of my board. And then I put that on my light box. And so it's all there. The thumbnails don't take me any time to draw.
Right.
And so it's all there. So I'm never looking at a blank page.
Okay, you're never like, oh, how do I get that? Okay,
because I've already worked on that. And so it's and you can do the thumbnails real fast.
Yeah.
And so if you don't like it, and then and you kind of clean it up as you go along, but you're never looking at the blank page.
That's awesome. That is, yeah.
$400 worth of advice right there.
That really is. I mean, if nothing else, like that's the thing to take away from.
If you took the pages from my book now and you were to take them out of the binder and flip them over, you would see on the back I've done all that. And if there's reference I need to draw or something, I'll Photoshop it in there, you know, or whatever. I picked up in New York. I picked up a book. A sketchbook by Joe, is it David Baldone? Baldone. He drew Nomad. He's Spanish.
Yeah.
Anyway, and he had his pencils in there, and he had done the same thing. I mean, I don't know that he flipped it, but he had it printed in there. And at one point, I think he drew Domino. Did you draw Domino recently? And at one point, somebody had a machete, and he had taken pictures of machetes and dropped them in there.
Yeah.
And so then
that's awesome.
And he may have drawn over it digitally, or may have drawn it. I've worked digitally. I've worked by hand or whatever, and I like it by hand. I can't get the finish that I like digitally.
Oh, I understand. Yeah, like I mean, you know me in technology, like
Well, I sit in front of a computer all day, and it's like I don't want to sit in front of one at the house.
There's something about the physically making a thing, and
some people can do it. I just haven't developed the knack for it.
No, I understand. I've
never been as happy with my digital stuff as I am with my hand drawn stuff.
I understand. Yeah. I think that's a good place to end that. But I want to leave on one of my favorite moments with you. Because
Buck, you said you weren't going to tell.
No, I mean, you've been coming here longer than I've been coming here. So you've
Buck
always
just said I'm old.
I mean,
Yeah.
Hey. No, but so you've always been part of the store to me.
Yeah.
And you've been around when I make a lot of purchases. Like people come in, all the time with stuff. Like I get 3 phone calls a day usually. Hey, do you buy comics? Hey, and it's not always just comics that they're trying to sell. And you came up with this thing. Hey, do you buy used mattresses? Just because.
I was trying to figure out where the line was.
Yeah, well,
actually, I had a mattress. I needed money.
Now,
I was buying a ring. I needed to sell my mattress.
Well, because people come in like, "Hey, do you buy comics?" Yes. Do you buy car parts? Do you buy that? And one day, we were just about to close down, and this guy pops in and says, "Hey, do you need to buy a used mattress?" And you were back in the corner. I've never heard you laugh so loud. It was just, it was the best. You're like, "Oh my God, yes!" I was like, "Don't listen to him." I was like, "No, man." Also, it's illegal to sell a used mattress. Yeah,
no, not if you leave the tag on.
Yeah, well, but needless to say, he left it in the back alleyway. So. But yeah,
I'm gonna do it with all my garbage. I'll bring it by, and if you won't buy it, I'll put it in your dumpster.
Don't get any ideas. All right, well, that will wrap us up for the New World podcast this week. Scott, thank you so much for joining us.
Buck, thank you for having me. Thank you for anybody that's listening to this and has taken the time to listen to this thing. Holy cow, you've got patience. Can I plug my website?
Oh yeah.
If you've listened to this and you've hung around this long and you're like, what does this guy's art look like? I don't know this guy. I've never been to Free Comic Book Day. You can check out my art at scottsackett.org. That's SCOTTSACKETT. 2 S's and 4 T's.
Yeah.
.org. It's got some various stuff on there. And hopefully sometime in the future I'll get this comic drawn and Source Point Press will put it out. You can order it here at Buck's, hopefully.
Yeah, and we'll do a signing.
All right.
Yeah. Brad, thanks for hosting it, doing all the hard work. You can catch him weekly on Nerds to Men, featuring me now, which is,
You're a third nerd.
Very gracious of him.
When do you become a man?
I'll let you know. And you can check that out on Spreaker and Stitcher and Streaker and YouTubes. And Brad, do you want to take this from me?
Spotify, iTunes, and Facebook. Go to our Facebook page.
Yeah, and like them if you.
We're almost to 1,000.
Ooh,
yeah,
the elusive 1,000.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you all for listening, and we'll be back next week.